Welcome back to the Actary Magic Channel. I'm Steve, the Actary. Today we're talking about Strefan's Vampires. Whoa, he's so hot off the process. Brand new out of the gate. Strefan is a Precon commander these days that everybody may be looking at. He's interesting. All right, so for those who aren't familiar, he is a 4-drop, 3/2 Vampire Noble with Flying. This is the beginning of your end step. Create a blood token for each player who lost life this turn. If you saw my previous video, you know that blood tokens are basically artifacts that enter the battlefield, and for one generic, tap, sacrifice the blood token, discard a card. Whoa, you're going to draw a card. Okay, so what you're doing is you're basically filtering through the top of your deck with these blood tokens to get the cards you need. Now, whenever Strefan attacks, you may sacrifice 2 blood tokens. If you do, you may put a vampire card from your hand onto the battlefield tapped and attacking, and it gains indestructible until end of turn. What's interesting to note is that he will only trigger at your end step to get you blood tokens, and there's not a whole lot of blood token generators in the Precon. I think there's like 4 or 5, maybe, outside of Strefan himself. So to really lean into that token generation thing, you'd have to work really hard. But let's talk about the vampires today. And first off, before we even get into the vampires, let's talk about triggering Strefan consistently. So first things first, we have 2 non-vampires who are going to play honorary vampire roles. Reckless Fireweaver is a 1 red, 1 generic. It says whenever an artifact enters the battlefield under your control, Reckless Fireweaver deals 1 damage to each opponent. This is going to be really, really good with after his trigger happens. Then we're going to get 3 artifacts, and we're going to shoot everybody at the table for 3. Very, very useful. Next up, we have Spear Spewer. Spear Spewer is a 1 mana 0/2 Goblin Warrior with Defender. It says tap Spear Spewer deals 1 damage to each player, so it will even hurt yourself. If you have some way of giving this guy like lifelink, it's just going to be gravy. But he is going to make sure that your Strefan is triggered every end step. Okay, next up we have vampires. Finally, Pulse Tracker and Vicious Conquistador are both 1/1s, both vampires, and they both say whenever it attacks, each opponent loses 1 life. These are good. These are such a fantastic include at the beginning of the game. You run them out, you get them out there quickly, you forget you even have them, and you immediately, whenever you run Strefan out, you can start getting value from those blood tokens. All right, more ways to trigger. We have Voldaren Epicure. It's a 1-drop common. I don't know why this wasn't included in the Precon. Maybe it just wasn't enough value, but it says when it enters battlefield, it deals 1 damage to each opponent. Create a blood token. So I think that having a low end, like, let's get this party started for vampires is very useful, in my humble opinion. The next one that we have that generates blood tokens, this is Angie, Maid of Dishonor. Now, this is what I'd call an automatic upgrade. Go get your copy. This goes in basically any vampire deck you can think of, I would think. It's a 4-drop, 4/5, 1 red, 1 black, 2 generic vampire. It says when Maid of Dishonor and or 1 or more other vampires enters the battlefield under your control, create a blood token. This ability triggers only once each turn. So it can trigger on your opponent's turns, but there's not a whole lot of vampires with flash to be able to trigger it. Pay 2, generic, sacrifice another creature or a blood token. Nothing to do with the blood tokens. Each opponent loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. So again, we can trigger our Strefan with Angie, Maid of Dishonor. Okay, let's talk Lords. Let's go swing, beaty beat. All right, first up, we have Vampire Socialite. These are only cards that aren't included in the Precon. So Vampire Socialite is a 2/2 for 2, a red and a black. Vampire Noble with Menace. Can't be blocked unless by 2 or more creatures. When Socialite enters the battlefield, if an opponent lost life this turn, put a 1/1 counter on each vampire you control. Great, Vanity. As long as an opponent lost life this turn, each other vampire you control enters the battlefield with an additional 1/1 counter on it. So dealing that point of damage to every opponent with our earlier trigger abilities means Vampire Socialite is going to make our board state massive. Captivating Vampire, though, is another auto include in the vampire builds these days. He's a 3-drop with double black, 1 red. Other vampire creatures you control get +1/1. Thank you. Tap 5 untapped vampires you control. Gain control of target creature becomes a vampire in addition to its other types. This is why he is so popular in these builds. All right, let's talk about another lord here. Bloodline Keeper isn't technically a lord on the front side, but he's a 3/3 flying for 4, double black, 2 generic. It says tap, put a 2/2 black vampire creature token onto the battlefield. Sweet. Pay 1 black, transform Bloodline Keeper. Activate this ability only if you control 5 or more vampires. A little bit hard to flip, but it won't be an issue. It says on the back side, it says other vampire creatures you control get +2/2. And he can still tap and put a 2/2 black vampire creature token with flying onto the battlefield, which basically means tap, put a 4/4 into play. It's good. Next up on our lords, we have Vampire Nocturnus, which is a 4-drop triple black, 1 generic. Play with the top card of your library field. As long as the top card of your library is black, Vampire Nocturnus and other vampire creatures you control get +2/+1 and have flying. This guy's very good with things that manipulate the top of your library, scroll rack if you really want to go hard into it, or even Sensei's Divining Top, but I don't recommend it. I say just let the guy ride, don't build into him. Patron of the Veil is another one. This is probably one we're going to cheat into play with our Strefan. He's a 6-drop double black 4 generic. He says 4/4. Whenever he enters the battlefield, destroy target creature and opponent controls. Whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, exile and put a 1/1 counter on each vampire you control. So this is very, very useful, especially with a new card out of the what do you call it? Out of the pre-constructed deck for Strefan that says all creatures get -X, where X is all non-vampire creatures get -X, where X is the number of vampires you control. Olivia's Wrath, I believe. And so you nuke the board, you get a bunch of token 1/1 counters on all of your creatures, and then you go swinging, and you're just gonna murder everybody. Okay, next up, we have Drana, Liberator of Malakir. It's a double black, 1 generic, 3 mana, 2/3 flying, first strike vampire ally. Blech. Whenever Drana, Liberator of Malakir, deals combat damage to a player, put a 1/1 counter on each attacking creature you control. Heck yeah. So that means that basically the first strike is very, very important, because now whenever we do normal damage or regular non-first strike damage, our board is going to be bigger. Vito, Thorn of Dusk Rose, is not technically a lord, but hear me out on this. 1 black, 2 generic, 1/3. Whenever you gain life, target opponent loses that much life. Okay, sweet. Pay 5. Double black, 3 generic. Creatures you control gain lifelink until end of turn. If you don't think that this isn't basically a big, huge pump your board, I'm going to win this turn, I got something else for you, because basically this says, like, damned if you do, damned if you don't. I'm sorry, it's the D word. Vito is good. Such an easy include in this deck. All right, next up we have big vampires here. Nighthawk Scavenger is the big brother to Vampire Nighthawk. It's a same casting cost, double black, 1 generic, 1+ star, and 3 toughness. It says flying, death touch, lifelink. Nighthawk Scavenger's power is equal to 1 plus the number of card types among cards in your opponent's graveyards. That's Planeswalker, Sorcery, Instant, Artifact, Land, all of those. And by the time he drops, he's probably going to be like a 4/3 or 5/3. That's just got flying, death touch, lifelink. He's fantastic. Westgate Regent is a recent one out of Adventures in the Forgotten Realm. It's double black, 3 generic, 4/4 flying, ward. It costs your opponent discarding a card to be able to target him. Whenever Westgate Regent deals combat damage to a player, put that many 1/1 counters on it. This dude is going to get huge very, very quickly. All right, some utility here. We've got Henrika Domnathi. She's a 4-drop double black, 2 generic, 1/3 flying vampire. At the beginning of combat on your turn, choose one that hasn't been chosen. Each player sacrifices a creature, draw a card and you lose a life, or transform Henrik Domnathi. Okay, so you can go straight into transforming her at the beginning of your combat if you want to. Flying, death touch, lifelink. Double black, 1 generic. Each creature you control with flying, death touch, or lifelink gets +1/+0 until end of turn. What's useful about this is you can pump multiple times for creatures that have flying, death touch, or lifelink, which a lot of vampires have one of these 3 on them. I think she's really, really useful. She's also going to make people sack creatures, also draw you a card. I think she's good. Utility, a little bit more utility here. We've got Blood Fountain, also not in the Precon. I can see why people would say not to, but I think it's pretty useful. One black artifact that says when it enters battlefield, create a blood token. Pay 4 and tap and sacrifice Blood Fountain. Return up to 2 creature cards from your graveyard to your hand. It helps get you some of that stuff back from your graveyard, and it's an early game play. Callous Blood Mage is a 1 black, 2 generic vampire warlock with 2/1. It says when it enters the battlefield, create a 1/1 black and green pest creature token with when this creature dies, you gain a life. Cool. Or you could draw a card and lose 1 life. Sweet. Or exile target player's graveyard. The drawing the card and exiling a graveyard is what I think is very useful about this guy, because it allows you to either board state and like draw another card, or even get rid of somebody's problematic graveyard. All right, more utility. Here we go. Falcon Wrath Forebearer. This guy reanimates himself or herself, whatever. Oh, herself. 1 black, 2 generic vampire. Flying, can't block. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, create a blood token. Yes. There's very few things that create blood tokens in this Precon. I don't know why. Anyway, pay 1 black, sacrifice 2 blood tokens, return Falcon Wrath Forebearer from your graveyard to the battlefield. This is awesome. She's setting up her own ability to come back to play, so she's going to be very hard for opponents to deal with. Board wipes can't keep her away from the fun. Voldaren Estate. It's a land. I think this card, you just need to get your copies of this card. 1 tap for a generic, pay 1 life, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. Spend this mana only to cast vampire spell. Sweet. And it also taps. 5 generic, create a blood token. Tap, create a blood token. This ability costs 1 less to activate for each vampire you control. So at 5 vampires, they really like that number of 5. You can start tapping this and create blood tokens just whenever. So it's really good late game to start sifting through the top of your library with those blood tokens and getting to the cards you need. All right, I thought this guy was cool. I mean, he's like one of the number 1 recommended cards to put in the deck. He's a black, he's a red, he's 1 generic, 3/3 vampire noble. First strike. Out of Midnight Hunt, he says at the beginning of your post-combat main phase, look at the top X cards of your library, where X is the total amount of life your opponent's lost this turn. So if you did 20 points of damage this turn, you're going to look at the top 20 cards. Exile 1 of those cards, put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. You may play the exiled card this turn. So that means if you need another land, if you need another big creature, this is just going to let you dig hard. I really like Florian Voldaren Scion. All right, let's talk about getting a big board state, especially after a board wipe. It's 1 black, 1 generic Voldaren Bloodcaster. There's also a Dracula version of this card, which is really cool. But anyway, Vampire Wizard, flying. Whenever Voldaren Bloodcaster or another non-token creature you control dies, create a blood token. Whenever you create a blood token, if you control 5 or more blood tokens, transform a Voldaren Bloodcaster. At the beginning of combat on your turn, up to 1 target blood token you control becomes a 2/2 black creature with flying and haste in addition to its other types. This stays a bat. Just bringing that to your attention. The blood token turns into a 2/2 bat that stays a bat. Very cool. Let's talk about the most powerful cards you came to doing. Drumroll, please. Twilight Prophet and Sorin Imperious Bloodlord. Twilight Prophet is gross. It's a 4-drop, double black, 2 generic, 2/4 vampire, cleric, ascend. If you control 10 or more permanents, you get the city's blessing. For the rest of the game, this is not a hard requirement. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you have the city's blessing, reveal the top card of your library and put it in your hand. Each opponent loses X life, and you gain X life, where X is that card's converted mana cost. So this is kind of a reverse Dark Confidant, that instead of us losing life for the card that we're getting, every opponent's losing life and we're gaining life. So it's really powerful. It's card draw and it's nuking our opponents. It's good. Sorin Imperious Bloodlord, though, is really, really dang good too. He's 1 black, 2 generic, Planeswalker, technically a vampire, if I may say so myself. 4 loyalty. It says +1, target creature you control gains Death Touch, Lifelink, and if it's a vampire, get a 1/1 counter on it. Yes, so even our non-vampires that made it into the deck can get bigger. Or sorry, not get bigger, can get Death Touch and Lifelink. +1, sacrifice vampire, you can do 3 damage to any target and gain 3 life. -3, you may put a vampire from your hand onto the battlefield. It's fantastic. Anyway, thank you so much for coming out. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe. I already did another video on Strefan about the non-vampire cards that go great in the Precon, and this was mostly focused on the vampires themselves. I'll see you tomorrow, or see you the next day, or whenever. I'll see you again. Have a good day, guys. See ya. Button. Bye.